The hum of the engines was the only sound that broke the silence in the command deck of the Vanguard. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space outside. Her hands gripped the control console tightly, but her mind was a whirlwind. The galaxy had never been this close to destruction. The Zeral, the most powerful alien empire humanity had ever faced, had turned its eyes on Earth. And now, their massive fleet was bearing down on them. The entire human race was at risk. Amelia wasn't a military genius. She wasn't a hero or a war strategist. She was just a survivor, someone who had fought for peace in a galaxy that had never truly known it. But now, she was leading humanity's last stand. A crackling sound broke the silence on the bridge, and Ray, her first officer, spoke up. His voice, though steady, carried a weight of concern. "Captain, the Zeral fleet is on the move. They've already taken out 3 of our colonies. We have less than an hour before they reach Earth." Amelia's chest tightened, but she didn't show it. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier than it did now. The fleet she commanded was a mix of different species: humans, Xanthar from the Rigelian system, Thalca warriors from the eastern colonies, and mercenaries from every corner of space. They weren't trained to work together. They didn't have the same goals, the same motivations. But one thing was clear: if they didn't unite, Earth would fall. "Bring up the enemy fleet on the screen," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm. She needed to see the threat with her own eyes. Ray nodded, his fingers moving swiftly across the control panel. On the view screen, a massive fleet appeared, its ships dark and menacing, their forms sleek and deadly. The Zeral fleet was like nothing they had ever encountered: huge capital ships, surrounded by smaller, agile destroyers. They were built for war, and they didn't take prisoners. Amelia swallowed hard, but she couldn't afford to show fear. "Tell the fleet to fall into formation. We're going to make them regret underestimating humanity." A few of the officers on the bridge exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. Amelia knew they were all scared. Who wouldn't be? The Zeral had already decimated their colonies. They were ruthless, efficient, and brutal. But they had one thing the Zeral didn't: the will to fight. "Captain," said Zale, the Xanthar commander, his voice low but intense, "we're not ready for this. Our fleet is too small. The Zeral have more ships, more firepower. This is suicide." Amelia turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. Zale was a veteran, a seasoned warrior who had fought in countless battles, but even he was uncertain. He didn't believe they stood a chance. Amelia understood the doubt in his eyes. The Zeral were a superior force, but if humanity didn't stand and fight now, it would be too late. "We fight or we die trying," Amelia said, her voice unwavering. "We have one shot at this, Zale. If we run, Earth is gone. We don't have the luxury of fear." Zale's gaze softened, and after a long moment he nodded. "Then we fight." Amelia's breath came out in a sigh of relief. They might be outgunned, but they weren't going to back down. She had made her decision. They would fight, not for victory, but for survival. She turned to Ray. "Prepare the fleet for combat. Set course for the Zeral flagship. We go in, we hit hard, and we don't stop until we've given them everything we've got." Ray looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and determination. "Yes, Captain," he said, his voice resolute. "All ships fall into position. We're engaging the Zeral." The crew moved quickly, the tension in the air palpable. There was no turning back now. Amelia had called the shot, and now they would either rise or fall together. As the Vanguard and the rest of the fleet maneuvered into position, Amelia stood still, her hands gripping the console as she watched Earth grow closer on the view screen. It was beautiful, a blue and white jewel suspended in the void of space. Earth was their home, their last hope. She couldn't let it fall. Not after everything humanity had fought for. Ray's voice broke her thoughts. "Captain, the Zeral are charging their weapons. We need to prepare for their first strike." Amelia's jaw tightened. "Brace for impact." The ship rocked as the first Zeral blast hit their shields. The Vanguard shuddered under the force, but the shields held. For now. "Shields are holding, Captain," Ray reported, but there was worry in his voice. "But they won't hold much longer." Amelia didn't flinch. "We can't afford to hesitate. Order the fleet to fire on the enemy's flanks. We need to disrupt their formation." The battle had begun, and now they were in the thick of it. The Zeral fleet didn't just attack, they overwhelmed. Their ships were like shadows in the dark, relentless and unforgiving. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the human fleet held its ground. They weren't as strong, but they were fast. They were unpredictable. The Zeril unleashed another wave of fire, and this time, their weapons hit harder. The Vanguard's shields flickered, and for a split second, Amelia thought they might fail. The ship rattled again, the impact of the blast reverberating through the hull. "Shields at 40%, Captain," Ray reported, his voice strained. "We need to fall back. We're taking too much damage." Amelia clenched her fists, her eyes never leaving the view screen. They couldn't back down. They couldn't let the Zeril push them into retreat. "No," she said firmly. "We stay, we fight." Ray stared at her, his expression conflicted. "Captain, we can't win this with brute force. They've got too many ships." "We'll make them fight on our terms," Amelia said, her voice cold with determination. "We're going to use the terrain to our advantage, push the fleet through the asteroid belt, let them think we're retreating, then we strike." Ray blinked in surprise. "You want us to fight in the asteroid belt? It's dangerous." "I want us to win," Amelia interrupted, her voice hard. "We don't have time to play by their rules. We do this now, or we lose everything." Ray hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood. All ships move into the asteroid field. Engage at my command." Amelia watched as the fleet shifted position, moving into the asteroid field. The Zeril ships, confident in their strength, followed without hesitation. They were too focused on destruction to realize they were walking right into a trap. "Now," Amelia said, her voice ringing out across the bridge, "all ships open fire." The Zeril fleet, now surrounded by rocks and debris, was caught off guard. The human fleet attacked with precision, taking down Zeril ships one by one. Their technology was superior, but they didn't know how to fight in the asteroid field. It was humanity's one advantage, an advantage they were going to make sure they used to the fullest. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the Zeril were starting to feel the pressure. The tide was turning. Amelia watched the chaos unfold before her, her heart pounding in her chest. They were winning. The Zeril fleet was losing its grip, and humanity was starting to show the galaxy what it was truly capable of. But the battle was still raging. The Zeril weren't going to give up easily. This was just the beginning. "Ray," Amelia called, her voice steady, "keep pushing them. We can't let up." Ray's voice came through, full of determination. "We're doing it, Captain. The Zeril are starting to break." She allowed herself a small breath of relief, but she knew they couldn't stop yet. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. The war was still ahead of them, but at least now, they knew they could win. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. And this battle, this moment, would define them forever. The battle had only just begun, but Captain Amelia Monroe could already feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The Vanguard shuddered under another powerful blast from the Zeril fleet. Their enemy was everywhere, surrounding them with superior firepower and technology. It seemed impossible, but there they were, the last hope of humanity and its allies, fighting for survival. Amelia stood at the center of the bridge, her hands gripping the console tightly. The view screen showed the vast emptiness of space, dotted with flashes of light as the fleets clashed. Human ships, alien destroyers, and mercenaries, vessels all wove together in a fragile, chaotic formation, under fire from the Zeril. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "Captain, our shields are weakening," Ray, her first officer, reported, his voice tense. "If we keep taking hits like this, we won't last long." Amelia took a deep breath. She knew the odds. They had no chance of defeating the Zeril fleet in a traditional battle. But they had something more powerful than sheer force. They had something the Zeril didn't expect: unity. "We hold," she said firmly, looking out at the dark void. "We fight like we've never fought before. Every ship, every crew member, every last person on this ship, we fight as one. That's how we win." Ray's eyes flicked toward her, searching her face for doubt, but he found none. Amelia had a calmness about her now, a steadiness in the chaos. Her words were a lifeline, a promise to the crew that no matter how impossible the fight, they weren't going to give up. Not yet. The sound of alarms and the hum of weapons filled the bridge, signaling the Zeril's next barrage. This wasn't a battle. It was a test, and she wasn't about to let her crew fail it. "Ray, order the fleet to move into formation," she commanded, her voice never wavering. We use the asteroid field to hide our movements. The Zeril think they can predict us. Let's prove them wrong. Ray didn't question her. He immediately relayed her orders. The Vanguard and the fleet around it began shifting positions, pulling into a tighter, more unpredictable formation. They weren't running, they were weaving through the debris of the asteroid field, using the rocks as shields to confuse the Zeril targeting systems. It was risky, but it was the only option they had left. Captain Zale, the Xanthar commander, called from the communications panel. His voice was filled with urgency. The Zeril have adapted quickly. They've already started to target our weaker ships at the back. We won't last long if we stay spread out like this. Amelia's heart sank. Zale was right. They couldn't afford to be separated for too long. If they were to survive, they needed to hit the Zeril while they were still disorganized. She couldn't afford hesitation. We go in close, Amelia said, her voice steady. Ray, tell the fleet to focus all fire on their flagship. We take down the leader and the rest will scatter. Ray's eyes widened. You're going for the flagship, Captain. It's heavily armored. It's their command center. I know, Amelia replied, her gaze hardening. But we have no choice. This is the only way to take them down. The crew held their breath, but Amelia's words were enough. She wasn't asking them to follow blindly. She was giving them the chance to be part of something greater, something bigger than any individual faction. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for their future, for Earth, and for every world that depended on their victory. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the asteroid field. The enemy ships followed, but they were no match for the human fleet's unpredictable movements. Amelia watched as one of the Zeril destroyers fired a volley of energy beams, only to miss their target completely as the Vanguard danced around the debris. Target their flagship, Amelia ordered, full power. The Vanguard's weapons fired in unison, a series of powerful energy blasts that tore into the flagship's shields. It shimmered, flaring brightly under the assault, but the Zeril flagship didn't go down. Not yet. Shields at 30%, Ray reported, his voice tight. We can't take much more of this. Amelia didn't blink. She could feel the weight of her decision now. They were committed. There was no turning back. Press on, she shouted. We're not backing down. We've come too far to quit now. For the next few minutes, the battle turned into a blur of gunfire and explosions. The Zeril ships were relentless, firing again and again, their weapons lighting up the sky. The Vanguard took hit after hit, but the crew held strong. They fought like a single unit, each person aware of the stakes. They had all been given a chance to be part of something bigger, and now they would make sure that chance wasn't wasted. Amelia gripped the armrest of her chair as the Vanguard swerved, narrowly avoiding another blast from the Zeril flagship. She had no choice but to push forward. If they didn't break the flagship's defenses now, they would lose the fleet. Ray, fire everything we've got, she commanded. The Vanguard unleashed its full power, every weapon it had firing simultaneously. The explosion that followed rocked the flagship, and for the first time, Amelia saw the Zeril flagship falter. Their shields were down. The ship was vulnerable. We've got them, Ray whispered, awe in his voice. Captain, their flagship is failing. The crew erupted in cheers, but Amelia didn't allow herself to relax just yet. This was just the beginning. The Zeril would retaliate. They always did. We're not finished, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the celebration. Keep the pressure on. Focus fire on the command center. If we take that out, we break their control. The human fleet pressed forward, their ships moving with newfound determination. The Zeril were disorganized, their fleet scattered, their flagship on the brink of destruction. The battle raged on, but it was clear now, the Zeril were losing. The moment of victory arrived without warning. A final, concentrated blast from the Vanguard hit the Zeril flagship's command center, and the ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave sent a ripple through space, knocking several Zeril ships off course. For a moment, everything went quiet. Captain, we've done it, Ray said, his voice filled with disbelief. The flagship is gone. The Zeril are retreating. Amelia stood still, her eyes locked on the view screen. The Zeril fleet, now leaderless, was falling apart. Their once precise formations were shattered. They had no command, no direction. We won, she whispered, her heart still racing, still unsure if she could believe it. We actually did it. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence, disbelief and relief flooding their faces. The battle had been brutal, but against all odds, they had won. But Sarah knew the war wasn't over. They had won this battle, but the Zeril weren't done, not by a long shot. Still, in this moment, Amelia allowed herself to feel the smallest glimmer of hope. They had done what no one thought possible. They had faced an impossible enemy and emerged victorious. And they had done it together. That was something worth fighting for. The Zeril had underestimated them. Humanity was stronger than they realized. And Sarah Monroe had led them to victory. The Vanguard hung in space, its hull battered and bruised, the flickering lights on the bridge serving as a constant reminder of the fight they had just survived. The crew was exhausted. Their faces were etched with the weariness of war. Some were injured, some were shaken, but all of them had one thing in common: they had survived. And that was something no one had expected. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her fingers gripping the console with such intensity that her knuckles had gone white. The Zeril fleet had been defeated for now, but she knew better than anyone that the Zeril were far from finished. They would come back. They always did. There was no real rest, not until the war was won. "We've done it," Ray, her first officer, said quietly from beside her. "But this isn't the end, is it?" Amelia's eyes flicked toward the view screen, where the scattered remains of the Zeril fleet floated in the vacuum of space. Some of their ships were still intact, drifting away, trying to regroup. The Zeril's retreat wasn't a victory. It was just a pause in the inevitable, a pause before they would strike again. "No," Amelia replied, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. "It's not the end, but it's a start. We have time, and we need to make it count." The Vanguard was heavily damaged. Their weapons were offline, and the ship's shields were barely holding. Yet somehow they had come through the battle. Sarah could see the exhaustion on her crew's faces, but she also saw something else, something that hadn't been there when they first came together: determination. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were fighting back. "Captain," Zale, the Xanthar fleet commander, said, his voice low but filled with respect. "We may have won this battle, but we've lost too much. Our fleet is down to half its strength, and we don't have the resources to keep going much longer. We need a plan, a real one." Amelia turned to him, her expression serious but not defeated. Zale had been a warrior for as long as anyone could remember, and his words held weight. The battle had taken its toll on their forces, and there was still so much left to do. "I know," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't afford to back down. We've bought Earth some time, but we need more than that. We need to hit the Zeril where it hurts. They can't just regroup and come back again. This time, we take the fight to them." Zale raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And what do you propose we do? We've seen their power. What can we do with half a fleet and no reinforcements?" "We fight smart," Amelia replied. "We can't go in head-to-head with them, not like this. But we can disrupt their command, break their communication, and scatter their forces. If we can disable their flagship, their fleet will fall apart." Ray stepped forward, his eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "It's risky. The Zeril flagship is heavily protected, and if we don't take it down, they'll rally their remaining forces. It'll be a full-scale war." "We don't have a choice," Amelia said, turning to face her crew. "We have to do this now, while we have the advantage. We can't wait for reinforcements. Earth is depending on us. They're still reeling from the Zeril's first wave, and we can't afford to give them another chance." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The Zeril were more than just a threat. They were a symbol of everything humanity had been fighting against. Their brutality, their technology, their power. It all represented the forces that sought to erase the people of Earth from the galaxy. Sarah looked around at her crew, their faces filled with fatigue but also a quiet strength. She had led them into the fire and they had come out the other side. But this next step would be even harder. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for freedom, for humanity's place in the galaxy. "Ray, prepare the fleet," Amelia ordered. "Set a course for the Zeril flagship. We hit them fast, we hit them hard. We won't give them a chance to regroup." Ray nodded, his face set with determination. "Aye, Captain." The Vanguard and the remaining ships of the fleet moved into position. The final push was coming, and it would determine everything. They had no reinforcements, no backup, but what they had was each other. They had unity, a unity forged in battle, born of necessity, but strengthened by the willingness to fight for a better future. Amelia stood at the helm, watching as the Zaral flagship grew larger on the screen. It was a massive ship, the size of a small moon, with layers of armor and shielding designed to withstand the worst attacks. But they had one thing the Zaral didn't: speed and unpredictability. They could strike from unexpected angles, confuse the enemy, and create chaos. "Captain," Zale called out from the tactical station, "we're in range. The flagship's shields are still holding, but if we get close enough, we can launch a full-scale attack on their command center." Amelia nodded, her fingers tightening around the controls. "We can't afford to waste time. Let's do this." The Vanguard surged forward, cutting through space with precision. The fleet followed, moving as one. The Zaral flagship loomed ahead, a dark behemoth, but Amelia had a plan. They wouldn't go in full force. They would move in close, use the asteroid field to shield them, and fire on the flagship's weak points. They had to disable its command systems before the Zaral could react. As they neared the flagship, Amelia's heart raced. The tension was palpable, but her focus never wavered. This was their one chance. They couldn't fail. "Prepare to fire," Amelia ordered, her voice calm but filled with determination. "Focus on their command center. Take down their communications." The fleet's weapons fired in unison, bright blasts of energy lighting up the void. The Zaral flagship's shields flared, absorbing the blasts. But Amelia wasn't surprised. The real attack would come when they got close enough to breach its defenses. The Zaral flagship retaliated, firing its powerful weapons at the fleet. The Vanguard swerved, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. The Vanguard's shields flickered under the attack, but they held, just a little longer. "We've almost got them," Ray said, his voice filled with tension. "The shields are weakening." Amelia's heart was pounding in her chest. This was it, the final push. If they didn't succeed now, everything they had fought for would be lost. There was no going back. "Fire," she commanded, her voice strong and resolute. The Vanguard unleashed everything it had, a final, devastating barrage of energy blasts. The Zaral flagship's shields buckled under the assault, and the ship's command center began to fracture. The explosion that followed was massive, a burst of light and fire that filled the screen. The flagship was gone. For a moment, there was silence. The crew stared at the view screen in disbelief. They had done it. They had taken down the Zaral flagship. "We've done it," Ray shouted, his voice filled with triumph. "The Zaral are in disarray. Their fleet is falling apart." Amelia stood still, staring at the empty space where the flagship had been. The battle wasn't over, but they had won a decisive victory. The Zaral were scattered, and for the first time, humanity had shown them that they could be beaten. But Amelia knew there was still work to be done. The Zaral were powerful, and they would regroup. This was just one battle in a long war, but today, humanity had proven something. They had shown the galaxy that they weren't weak. They weren't just survivors. They were fighters. And they would never give up. The Vanguard trembled as another barrage of Zaral energy beams slammed into its shields. The crew braced themselves, but the ship held, its reinforced hull groaning under the pressure. The once pristine bridge, now cluttered with screens flashing warnings, was a testament to the battle they had fought, and the battle still raging. Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her knuckles tight around the console, but her gaze never wavered. She wasn't going to let her crew see her fear. Not now. Not when so much was on the line. The Zaral flagship, now battered and burning from their previous attack, remained a massive, unyielding presence on the battlefield. It loomed over the remaining human ships, its enormous size and strength a dark reminder of how small and outmatched they were in this war. Yet, as the Vanguard swerved once more, narrowly avoiding another wave of fire, Amelia's mind was set. They would win. She refused to believe otherwise. "Captain," Ray said from his post, his voice tense. "We've damaged their flagship, but they're still fighting. The Zaral fleet is regrouping. They're preparing to strike back hard." Amelia's gaze flicked over to the tactical display. The Zaral ships, now in disarray, were trying to pull together. Their communication systems, though damaged, were still working, and their reinforcements had arrived. But she could see it, There was a crack in their armor. The Zeril were not invincible, and they knew it now. "We've got one shot at this," Amelia said, her voice cold with determination. "We disable the flagship's command center, and the rest of the fleet will fall apart. We hit them with everything we've got." Ray hesitated for a moment, his eyes dark with doubt. "Captain, their shields are still holding. We've thrown everything at them, and they've absorbed it all. What if we're out of time? What if?" Amelia turned to him sharply, cutting off his words. "We don't have the luxury of doubt, Ray. If we hesitate now, we lose everything. We've already lost so much. For Earth, for the galaxy, we can't stop now." Ray looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the fire in her that had been missing before. It wasn't just the will to survive anymore. Amelia wasn't just fighting to protect Earth. She was fighting to show the universe that humanity wasn't weak, that they could stand up to the Zeril and every threat that came their way. "Understood," Ray said, his voice steady. "We'll make it happen." "Gather the fleet," Amelia said. "Tell them to form up around the vanguard. We make our final push. Now." The words left her lips with the weight of finality. The crew scrambled into action. Every officer, every soldier aboard the vanguard knew what was at stake. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sounds were the quick footsteps of crew members moving in perfect synchrony, preparing for the most dangerous phase of their fight. Amelia watched as the other ships of the fleet, though battered, took their positions. Zael, the Xanthar fleet commander, was already giving orders to his crew, his voice fierce with confidence. The Xanthar had always been a proud species, and they fought with an honor that came from centuries of warfare. They were here, and they were ready. "Ray, how much time do we have until they launch their next wave?" Amelia asked, her gaze never leaving the view screen. Ray worked quickly, his fingers flying across the console. "They're preparing for the final attack. We've got minutes, maybe less." "Then we don't waste any more time," Amelia replied. "Lock in on their command center. Let's end this." The vanguard surged forward, cutting through the space between the asteroids like a spear. The Zeril flagship, massive and menacing, loomed ahead, its weapons still charging, ready to destroy everything in its path. The Zeril ships surrounding it were slowly closing in, preparing to make their final stand. Amelia didn't look away from the view screen. The vanguard was almost within range of the flagship now, and she knew this was their last chance. The fleet followed her lead, moving in unison, their ships forming a protective ring around the vanguard. The firepower from the Zeril was relentless, but they couldn't keep this up forever. Their shields were weakening, just like the Zeril's. This was it, the final showdown. "Captain," Ray said quietly, his voice full of urgency, "we're in range of their flagship. We're taking fire." "Fire everything we've got," Amelia ordered, her voice sharp. "This is our only chance." The vanguard and the rest of the fleet unleashed their weapons, every gun firing at once, every missile, every energy blast striking the Zeril flagship. The first few shots hit its shields, but they held. It wasn't enough to break through. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. They had to do more. They had to take that flagship down. "Ray," she said, her voice a whisper, "focus fire on the command center. It's the only way." Ray's eyes met hers. "I know, Captain, it's all we've got." They fired again, this time focusing all their energy on the weak spot. The Zeril flagship's shields flared under the attack, but they didn't hold. For a brief moment, Amelia saw it, the opening. The shields were collapsing. She shouted, "Now, Ray, take the shot." The vanguard fired again. This time, it hit the flagship's command center directly. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a tremendous explosion, the flagship erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave shook the ship, sending a ripple of energy through the fleet. Amelia held her breath as she watched the flagship disintegrate before her eyes. The Zeril flagship, once the pride of their fleet, was gone. "Captain, they've lost their command center," Ray shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "The Zeril fleet is retreating, they're falling apart." The crew erupted into cheers, but Amelia didn't join them. Her chest tightened as she stared at the screen. The battle wasn't over. The Zeril weren't gone for good. But this was the turning point. "Ray, send word to the fleet," Amelia said, her voice quiet but full of authority. "We keep up the pressure. We don't let them regroup." Ray nodded, relaying the command. The fleet moved into formation again, and the remaining Zaral ships scattered. They were leaderless, their control systems broken. The Vanguard and its fleet had done what seemed impossible. They had shattered the Zaral's grip on the galaxy. The aftermath was quiet. The battle was over for now, and the Zaral fleet was in retreat. But Amelia knew this wasn't the end. This victory was only a glimpse of what they could do when they fought together. Humanity wasn't just a survivor. They had fought with everything they had, and they had won. "Captain," Ray said, his voice calm now, "we did it." Amelia stood still, staring at the wreckage of the Zaral fleet. The lights on the bridge flickered, the exhaustion in her body finally catching up to her. They had won, but the weight of leadership still hung heavy on her shoulders. The Zaral would be back. They would always come back. "We've won this battle," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the screen. "But the war is far from over." But as she spoke, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. And this time, they had shown the universe what they were truly capable of. It wasn't over, but the fight had only just begun. The Vanguard drifted through space, its engines humming quietly after the storm of battle. The lights on the bridge flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The once bustling command deck was now eerily still, the crew's exhaustion evident in their movements. They had won, but no one was celebrating. Not yet. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, staring out at the wreckage of the Zaral fleet. The vast expanse of space was dotted with the remnants of their enemy, destroyed ships floating aimlessly, the once mighty Zaral fleet now in ruins. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was the weight of everything they had lost. The battle had been brutal. The Zaral had thrown everything they had at them, and they had responded with every ounce of strength they could muster. But at what cost? The Zaral were defeated for now, but their empire was vast. There was no guarantee that the Zaral would stay down. They had been fighting for humanity's survival, but that victory was only temporary. "Captain," Ray's voice broke her thoughts. His tone was soft, filled with respect but also concern. "We've done it. The fleet's retreating and the Zaral flagship is gone, but we've lost so much. Our ships, our crew, the damage, it's too much." Amelia nodded, her throat tight. "I know, but we still have Earth, and that's something we can build on." Ray stepped closer, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "But what about the rest of the galaxy? The Zaral won't be gone forever. This battle may be over, but the war is far from finished." She turned toward him, her eyes filled with the weight of his words. "I know, I'm not blind to what we've lost, Ray, but I've seen what we're capable of. I've seen the strength in this crew. We've faced the Zaral head-on, and we've proven we can stand against them." Ray's face softened. "We're not the same as we were before, are we? You've changed. We've all changed." Amelia smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "War does that to people. It changes you, but it doesn't have to break us. We're not the underdogs anymore. We've shown the Zaral that they can be beaten. We've proven that humanity is not just a race to be wiped out. We're not going anywhere." Ray's gaze softened, and he nodded as though he had been waiting to hear those words. "You're right, we're not done yet." Amelia turned back to the view screen, her eyes scanning the wreckage of the Zaral fleet. They had done it. They had defeated their enemies. But there was a lingering question in her mind. Was this enough? Would Earth and the galaxy truly be safe now, or had they merely delayed the inevitable? The days that followed the battle were a blur of activity. The fleet limped home, each ship battered, every crew member exhausted. The Vanguard had survived, but barely. Repairs were underway, but there was still so much damage to repair. Amelia spent most of her time on the bridge, coordinating with Ray, Zale, and the other commanders, ensuring that the remaining forces were ready for whatever came next. The communication with Earth came through sooner than she expected. General Harris, the leader of Earth's resistance, appeared on the screen, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Captain Monroe," Harris said, his voice filled with a sense of gratitude, "you've done it. The Zaral have been driven back. Earth is still here, and we have you to thank for that. You've given us the time we needed to rebuild." Amelia stood straighter, her heart swelling with a sense of pride, though she could still feel the heaviness of the battle. "We've bought Earth time, General, but we both know the Zaral will be back. They always do." Harris nodded solemnly. You're right, of course, but right now we're focusing on rebuilding. Thanks to you and your crew, we've got the breathing room we need to defend ourselves. This victory, it's going to inspire the entire human race, and Earth will rise from the ashes, just like you promised. Amelia allowed herself a small smile. That's all I wanted, General, a chance for Earth to survive, to fight back. I can't promise you that the Zeral won't come again, Harris said, but you've given us hope, and with that we'll fight. We won't back down. Good, Amelia replied. That's what we need. No matter what comes, we fight together. The call ended, but Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. Yes, Earth had survived, but what about the other worlds? What about the rest of the galaxy? The Zeral Empire was vast. It would take more than one victory to ensure that they never threatened humanity again. The days turned into weeks, and the fleet continued to repair itself. There were still signs of life left in the Zeral remnants. They were rebuilding, regrouping, but they were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. The galaxy had seen that humanity could fight back, and now every species, every faction that had once stood alone, was starting to come together. It wasn't easy. There were old rivalries, deep-seated grudges between species, and distrust among allies. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. The Xanthar, the Thalca, the mercenaries, all of them saw the same thing. The Zeral weren't just a threat to humanity. They were a threat to everyone. Amelia had brought them together, and in doing so, she had sparked something more powerful than any weapon the Zeral could ever possess: unity. She could see it in the eyes of her crew, in the way the factions were beginning to work together. This was the first time they had truly acted as one. The Vanguard was fully repaired, its weapons upgraded, its shields stronger than before. The fleet had grown, too, with more ships joining the alliance. And as they prepared for the next battle, Amelia knew one thing for certain: humanity wasn't just a survivor. They were a force to be reckoned with. She stood on the bridge once again, watching as the fleet assembled. The view screen showed Earth, still fragile but alive. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a victory nonetheless. They had survived the Zeral, but now they had to prepare for whatever came next. Ray walked up beside her, his expression more at ease than it had been in weeks. "You did it, Captain. We did it. We've shown the galaxy that humanity has a place here, that we're not just prey." Amelia nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. "This is just the beginning, Ray. We've beaten them once. We'll do it again, but we need to be ready. The Zeral won't stop, and neither will we. We'll rebuild and we'll fight." Ray looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration. "You're more than just a leader, Captain. You've given us hope, and that's worth fighting for." Amelia smiled faintly, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had lost. "We've come this far. We'll go further together." As the fleet prepared for its next mission, Amelia felt the weight of leadership settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. She was fighting for a future, for every world that had joined the fight. And for the first time, she believed they could win. Humanity wasn't just a survivor anymore. They were a force, united and ready to take on whatever came next. And under Amelia's leadership, they would fight together. The Vanguard glided through the stars, its engines humming with quiet determination. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her fingers lightly brushing the console, her mind far from the calm of space. Her crew had been through hell, and now they were preparing for what could be their final fight. She had led them to victory before, but the Zeral had only been forced to retreat. The galaxy was still at war, and it was only a matter of time before the Zeral regrouped, stronger than ever. Amelia's eyes shifted to the view screen, where Earth appeared in the distance. It was a bright blue jewel, beautiful and fragile, still reeling from the devastation the Zeral had brought. They had won, but the victory had come with sacrifices. Many ships had been lost, many good people. And as the fleet began to regroup, it was clear that the battle for Earth was far from over. "Captain," Ray's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing beside her, his brow furrowed as he looked at the display. "The fleet is in position. We've got enough time to plan for the next phase, but we need to act fast. The Zeral are not going to stay down forever." Amelia nodded slowly, her heart heavy. She had spent so many nights worrying about the future, wondering if they were truly ready for the storm that was coming. The battle they had just fought was only a small part of a much larger war. The Zeral would return. They would come for Earth, for the galaxy, and they would bring everything they had. I know, Ray, Amelia said quietly, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. We've won one battle, but it's just the beginning. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Ray turned to her, his face full of concern. But how do we prepare for the Zeral coming back? Their fleet is vast, and we're already stretched thin. We don't have the numbers to face them head-on again. Amelia met his gaze, her expression unwavering. We don't need to face them head-on. We need to fight smart. We'll use their own arrogance against them. The Zeral think they're invincible. They think we're nothing but an afterthought. We'll show them that humanity is more than just a nuisance. Ray raised an eyebrow, still uncertain. How? We'll use their tactics against them, Amelia said with a quiet smile. We'll lure them into a trap. We've already shown them that we're not afraid to fight. Now, we make them pay for underestimating us. Ray's expression softened. He nodded, understanding what she was getting at. Amelia wasn't just a survivor, she was a leader, someone who could make the impossible seem like the only option. She had done it before, and now, with Earth's survival on the line, she was ready to do it again. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the Vanguard and the remaining ships in the fleet moved into position. The crew worked tirelessly, repairing the damage done to the ships, preparing their weapons, and making sure everything was in place for the next phase of the plan. But even with the preparations underway, there was an unease that lingered in the air. Every member of the crew knew the cost of the next battle. The Zeral might have retreated, but they weren't finished. Not yet. Amelia moved through the halls of the Vanguard, her steps steady but heavy. She could feel the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders, the responsibility for every life on the ship. She passed crew members in the hallway, some smiling at her in passing, others too exhausted to even meet her eyes. She knew that some of them were still reeling from the losses. The Zeral had taken so much from them already. They needed a reason to keep going. They needed hope. She entered the briefing room, where the commanders of the fleet were gathered, waiting for her to arrive. Ray, Zale, and the others looked up as she entered, their faces filled with respect and expectation. Amelia didn't need to say a word. She could see it in their eyes. They were ready. Captain, Zale said, standing as she entered. The fleet is in position. We're ready to move out. Amelia nodded, her voice steady. Good, we've already proven we can stand against them. Now we prove we can defeat them. We've been given a chance to strike back, and we're going to take it. The other commanders nodded in agreement, but Sarah could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. It was natural. After the devastation they'd already faced, it was hard to believe they could pull off another victory. But that was where the Zeral had made their mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and that was something Amelia wasn't about to let slide. We've made it this far, she continued, her voice unwavering. We've faced worse odds and we've survived. But now we need to strike at the heart of the Zeral, their fleet. We know their strengths, but we also know their weaknesses. We'll use that. We'll make them pay for every life they've taken. The room was silent for a moment. Then Zale spoke up, his voice filled with quiet respect. You're right, Captain. We've seen what they can do, but we've also seen how far we've come. We can do this. We fight together. A wave of understanding passed through the room. The crew wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for each other. Amelia's eyes hardened. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Every ship, every crew member, every person on this fleet, this is our fight. And we're going to win. The Vanguard's engines roared to life as the fleet surged forward. The battle was about to begin, and this time, Amelia wasn't just leading them into battle. She was leading them to victory. They would fight smart, they would fight hard, and they would fight together. But as the fleet moved into position, the Zeral ships appeared on the horizon, their vast fleet filling the view screen. The Zeral were already waiting for them, their weapons ready. The calm before the storm had passed. Captain, Ray said, his voice tight with tension. They're closing in fast, this is it. There's no turning back now. Amelia stood tall, her hand resting on the console. No turning back, she whispered. This is the moment we've been waiting for. We make them regret ever underestimating humanity. As the Zeral ships advanced, Amelia's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She knew this battle wasn't just about strength. It was about heart. And humanity had that in spades. "Prepare for battle," she said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "We fight for Earth. We fight for the galaxy. We fight for our future." The Zeral may have been stronger. They may have been more advanced. But what they didn't have was humanity's spirit. And that was something no weapon in the galaxy could ever defeat. "Let's finish this," Amelia said, as the first shots rang out. The fight for their future had begun, and Amelia Monroe was ready to lead them to victory. No matter what it took, the Vanguard hurtled through the stars, its engines roaring as the ship and the rest of the fleet positioned themselves for the final confrontation. The Zeral were right in front of them, an overwhelming force, far stronger than anything humanity had ever faced. Yet here they were, standing firm, ready for battle. They had no choice now. Earth was depending on them. The galaxy was depending on them. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her hands clenched around the console, her jaw set with determination. The Zeral flagship loomed large on the screen, its massive size and sleek design intimidating. The last time they had fought, they had managed to break the Zeral's command structure. But now, the Zeral had regrouped, their forces reinforced. This was the final fight, and they needed to make it count. Ray, her first officer, stood beside her, his face filled with the same unwavering resolve. "Captain," he said, his voice steady despite the tension, "the fleet is in position. We're ready for the assault." Amelia nodded, but her eyes never left the view screen. She could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of what they were about to do. If they didn't succeed now, if they didn't strike with everything they had, Earth could fall. Humanity could fall. She had seen the faces of the crew, exhausted, scarred, but still determined. They had fought through so much, lost so many, yet they stood together, united by one goal. Amelia wasn't just fighting for her crew anymore. She was fighting for the future of Earth and every world that had joined their cause. "Hold steady," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "We've made it this far. We can't give up now." Ray gave her a reassuring look, but he didn't speak. They both knew the stakes. The Zeral were no longer just an alien threat, they were a symbol of everything humanity had been fighting against. Their weapons, their strength, their relentless drive to destroy, everything had led to this moment. Captain Zale, the Xanthar commander, called out from the tactical console. "We've got incoming fire. Their weapons are charging. They're preparing to strike." Amelia's heart raced, but she forced herself to focus. "Brace for impact," she commanded, her voice steady. "We fight back, now." The first blast from the Zeral hit the Vanguard's shields with a deafening crash. The ship rocked, and alarms blared across the bridge. The shields flickered, but they held. For now. Ray gripped his seat as the next wave of fire came. "Shields at 40%, Captain. We can't take another hit like that." "Then we won't let them hit us," Amelia replied, her voice calm, but with the unmistakable strength that had carried them this far. "Tell the fleet to stay in formation. Move in close. Let's show them how we fight." The fleet followed her orders, moving into formation around the Vanguard like a shield. The Zeral fired again, their energy blasts lighting up the dark expanse of space. But this time, the human ships were ready. They dodged and weaved, using the speed and unpredictability the Zeral hadn't accounted for. "Focus on their flagship," Amelia ordered. "We need to disable their command center. If we take that out, the rest of their fleet will fall apart." Ray's voice was tight with urgency as he relayed the command. "All ships, target the Zeral flagship's command center. Fire at will." The fleet unleashed everything it had. Explosions filled the screen as the Zeral flagship took hit after hit. The massive ship staggered, its shields flickering under the sustained attack. The human fleet didn't stop. They couldn't stop. This was their one chance to win. "Captain, the flagship's shields are weakening," Zale reported. "We're getting through." But even as the Zeral flagship faltered, their retaliation was swift and brutal. Another wave of energy blasts hit the fleet, causing several ships to break formation. The Vanguard shook violently under the onslaught, and alarms blared once again. "Shields are down to 20%, Ray reported, his voice strained. "We're losing ground." Amelia's stomach twisted. They couldn't take much more of this. The Zeral were relentless, but she refused to give up. Not now, not when they were so close. "Ray, give them everything we've got. Full power. This is the last push." Ray nodded, his fingers flying over the console. The Vanguard's weapons powered up, and another blast of energy shot out toward the Zaryl flagship. This time, the blast hit the flagship's command center directly. For a moment, everything was still. The flagship's shields shimmered one last time, and then, nothing, the ship exploded, its destruction lighting up the sky. The shockwave from the explosion rippled across space, knocking several Zaryl ships off course. The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia's heart stopped for a beat as she stared at the wreckage of the flagship. The Zaryl flagship, their command center, was gone. "We did it," Ray said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We've taken down the flagship." Amelia felt a rush of relief wash over her, but she didn't allow herself to relax. The Zaryl fleet was still there, still fighting. Their flagship was gone, but they were not finished. Not yet. "Stay sharp," Amelia said, her voice firm. "We're not done yet. Keep the pressure on. The Zaryl will scatter. We take out the rest of their fleet." The crew moved quickly, relaying her orders. The Zaryl fleet, now leaderless and in disarray, tried to regroup, but they were slow. The human fleet, using the momentum from their victory, pressed forward, targeting Zaryl ships one by one. The tide had truly turned. The Zaryl fleet, once a unified force, was now broken. Their ships were retreating, their formation collapsing. And as the Vanguard led the charge, Amelia could see the hope returning to her crew. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. "Captain," Ray said, his voice quieter now, full of awe. "The Zaryl fleet is retreating. They're abandoning the battle." Amelia watched as the last of the Zaryl ships turned and fled into the darkness. It was over. The Zaryl had been defeated, at least for now. "We did it," Ray whispered. Amelia's heart raced. She had led them to victory. She had brought together a fleet that was smaller, weaker, and outmatched, and they had defeated the Zaryl. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, the exhaustion, the fear, the losses, but she couldn't dwell on it. There was still work to be done. "We've won," she said softly, her voice steady. "But this is only the beginning." The crew of the Vanguard erupted in cheers, their faces lighting up with the joy of victory. They had fought together, and they had won together. Amelia turned back to the view screen, watching as the last of the Zaryl ships disappeared into the blackness of space. Humanity had survived. They had fought back. And for the first time in a long time, Amelia allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt since the war began: hope. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And no matter what came next, she would lead them. They would face the storm together. I had never thought of myself as someone who was paranoid. In fact, I prided myself on being rational, logical, the kind of person who didn't jump to conclusions or let anxiety control her. But that all changed when I found the tracker. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over my driveway. I had just come home from a long day of work and was looking forward to a quiet evening. I'd been working hard to get my life back on track after some personal setbacks, and the last thing I wanted was something else to disrupt my peace. But then, as I walked towards my car, something caught my eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. I could have missed it if I hadn't been paying attention. But there it was, something small, glinting in the sunlight, attached to the underside of my car near the rear bumper. I crouched down for a closer look, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. It didn't take long for me to realize what it was: a small, black device, no bigger than a matchbox with a blinking red light. A GPS tracker. I froze. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was some kind of mistake, a piece of equipment someone had dropped, or something that had accidentally gotten stuck under my car. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Someone had put it there on purpose. I stood up slowly, my mind racing. Who would put a tracker on my car? Who had been watching me? I had no idea, but the feeling of violation hit me hard. My body tensed up as panic began to seep in. How long had it been there? How long had I been watched without even knowing it? And why? What was the purpose? I immediately took out my phone and snapped a picture of the tracker, my hands shaking as I did. I wasn't sure what I expected to do with it, but I knew I had to document it. Something about this felt wrong, and I needed proof. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I even say? Someone put a tracker on my car? It sounded absurd, like something out of a bad spy movie. Still, the longer I stared at the device, the more I realized I couldn't ignore it. I needed to know who had done this. I couldn't just let it slide. I carefully removed the tracker, my mind racing as I did. It was surprisingly easy to take off. Whoever had put it there hadn't done a very good job hiding it. I examined it for a few seconds before slipping it into my pocket. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I had to act fast. I decided to take a drive to clear my head. My mind was in overdrive, trying to make sense of the situation. Who would want to track me? And more importantly, who could have placed the tracker there without me noticing? I thought about my life, trying to think of anyone who might have a reason to watch my every move. There was Mark, of course, my ex-husband, but we had been divorced for over a year. He had no reason to be spying on me, right? Then there was my family. I could hear my mom's voice in my head, nagging about how I should have trusted them more, how I shouldn't have tried to do everything on my own. But would they really go this far? Would anyone in my life be so desperate to control me, to invade my privacy like this? The thought made me sick. No, I didn't believe it. But I still couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that someone, somewhere, was watching me. Someone I trusted. Someone who knew my routine and my habits. The idea of being watched, of having my every move monitored, sent chills down my spine. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, unable to focus on anything. The tracker weighed heavy in my pocket, like a ticking bomb ready to go off. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't concentrate. I tried to read, but my mind kept drifting back to the device. Finally, I decided to take action. I couldn't just sit around and wait. I had to find out who was behind this, no matter how crazy or dangerous it might be. I contacted a private investigator. He was a no-nonsense guy, someone I had used in the past for other, more trivial matters. I told him everything. The tracker, the weird feeling of being watched, my suspicions about who might be involved. He listened, asked a few questions, and then assured me that he would take care of it. "I'll get to the bottom of this," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Don't worry, we'll figure out who's behind this." The next few days were a blur. The investigator worked quietly behind the scenes, following leads, tracking down the origin of the device. I stayed in contact with him, constantly checking in, but the answers didn't come quickly. I found myself growing more and more impatient, more and more anxious. Then, a week later, I got the call. The investigator had found something, and it wasn't good. "I've traced the tracker," he said over the phone, his voice grave, "and it's not what we thought." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "The tracker isn't just some random device someone slapped on your car. It's linked to a larger operation. The GPS signals were routed through several different locations, and they all point to the same place, a truck heading to Canada." Canada, I felt the blood drain from my face. What? A truck? What does that even mean? The investigator took a deep breath. "It means someone is using your car as part of a larger operation. Someone been tracking you because you're involved in something much bigger than you realize." I stood frozen, the room spinning around me. Involved in what? "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I need you to stay calm and stay put. I'll be in touch soon." The phone call ended, but the weight of the words hung in the air. A truck heading to Canada. I had no idea what I was involved in. But whatever it was bigger than I had ever imagined. The next few days were filled with a sense of dread. The private investigator continued his work, but I could tell there was more to the situation than he was letting on. Every time I checked my phone, I half expected him to tell me that I was in danger, that the people who were behind this were closer than I thought. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, it happened. The phone rang, and the number on the screen was unfamiliar. My heart stopped. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling that I already knew what this call was about. "Hello," I answered, my voice shaky. "It's me," the investigator's voice came through the phone. "I've traced the truck, and I've found something I think you need to know." I sat up straight, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it?" "Whoever's behind this, they're not just tracking you. They're tracking something that belongs to you, something you don't even know about." My pulse raced. "What are you talking about?" "I can't say much over the phone, but I need you to meet me. It's urgent." I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what kind of world I had just stumbled into, but as I drove to meet the investigator, I knew one thing for sure. My life was about to change forever. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever was coming next. The ride to the investigator's office felt like an eternity. Every mile seemed to stretch longer than the last, and every thought running through my mind seemed darker. What could this be about? Was I really involved in something dangerous, or was it just some bizarre coincidence? The phone call had thrown me off balance. Someone was watching me, someone I didn't know, and the tracking device wasn't a random mistake. I was a part of something bigger, but what exactly? I tried to clear my head as I parked in front of the investigator's office. It was a modest building on the corner of a quiet street. I stepped out of my car, my legs feeling a little unsteady beneath me. The air felt unusually cool, a sharp contrast to the anxious heat building in my chest. I had spent the last few days trying to push the situation to the back of my mind, telling myself it was probably just a mistake. But deep down, I knew it was. The more I thought about it, the more my gut told me that something wasn't right, and I needed answers. I entered the office and was immediately greeted by a quiet, familiar hum of activity. The investigator's office was sparse, the walls lined with old wooden bookshelves. The investigator, named Mark, was sitting behind his desk, looking over a few papers. He looked up as I entered and waved me over. "Take a seat, Sarah," Mark said, his tone calm but serious. I sat down across from him, my hands nervously folded on my lap. "So, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "What did you find?" Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes focused intently on me. "I've done some digging," he said, "and this is bigger than you think. The tracker you found, it's not just some random device. It's part of a much larger operation." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, operation?" "I've traced the truck, like I said. It's heading north to Canada. But here's the twist. The truck isn't just transporting goods. It's carrying something else. Something that was supposed to stay hidden." I felt the blood drain from my face. What could it be? What am I connected to? Mark paused, his expression unreadable. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I believe someone's using you as a pawn in a much bigger game. The tracker is just the beginning. Whoever's behind this knows exactly what they're doing, and they're not just keeping an eye on you for no reason. There's something they want, something that has to do with you." I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my stomach. This was no longer some random act of paranoia. It was real, and I had been unknowingly dragged into the middle of it. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do they want from me?" "I'm not sure yet," Mark said, leaning forward. "But I think you need to stay alert. They've been tracking you for a reason, and I need to find out what that reason is before it's too late." I felt a chill run down my spine. What happens if we don't figure this out? What if we're too late? Mark's face grew serious. "If they're watching you, they're watching your every move. And if they want something from you, they won't hesitate to take it." I spent the rest of the day trying to process everything Mark had told me. It felt like I was living in someone else's life, like the world I knew was starting to fall apart. The tracker had been just the beginning, but what would happen next? I kept replaying Mark's words in my mind. "If they want something from you, they won't hesitate to take it." The thought of someone knowing my every move, being able to track me at any moment, made my skin crawl. I wanted to believe this was all just a misunderstanding, some mistake that could be fixed, but I knew deep down it was. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to back down easily. That night, I sat in my living room, staring out the window. The city outside was quiet, the usual hum of traffic now just a distant memory. It felt like I was the only person awake in the world. I thought about the life I had built, how much I had fought to get to this point. But now it felt fragile, like it could all come crashing down at any moment. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking my thoughts. I grabbed it quickly, my heart racing as I saw the unknown number flashing on the screen. The last time I had answered a call from an unknown number, it had changed everything. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello." A voice I didn't recognize came through the line, deep and menacing. "Sarah." I froze. How did they know my name? "You've been asking questions," the voice continued. "You've been digging where you shouldn't. You need to stop or things will get worse." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end chuckled, low and dark. You don't need to know that. What you need to know is that we're watching you. You can stop this, but you have to stay quiet. If you don't, there will be consequences. I opened my mouth to speak, but the voice cut me off. This is your final warning. Stay quiet. Do what we say and nothing happens, but if you don't. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't a game. This was real. Someone was threatening me, and they had the power to follow through. I couldn't just sit back anymore. I had to take control. The next morning, I went straight to Mark's office. I wasn't waiting around any longer. The phone call had pushed me to my breaking point. If someone was going to threaten me, I needed to know exactly who they were and what they wanted. When I arrived, Mark was already waiting for me. His expression was serious, but he didn't seem surprised to see me. "You're moving fast," he said, his voice steady. "I need answers," I replied, sitting down across from him. "Who's behind this? Who wants something from me?" Mark leaned forward, his fingers interlaced on the desk. "I'm working on it. I'll dig deeper, but I need you to stay cautious. Whoever's behind this is playing a dangerous game." "You're not telling me everything," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Who are they, Mark? What do they want?" Mark paused, his gaze shifting toward the window. "I don't have all the pieces yet, but the truck, the one you saw going to Canada, I believe it's part of something larger. There's a group operating across borders, and it seems they've latched onto you." "Why me?" I repeated, my voice tight. "I don't know," he said, "but I'll find out. I promise you, Sarah, we're going to figure this out. But I need you to trust me and stay safe. I'll need your full cooperation." I nodded, even though my mind was racing. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't back down now. The following days were a blur of phone calls, research, and mounting tension. I spent every waking moment thinking about the people behind this. Every time my phone rang, I feared it was them, that threatening voice from the night before. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like eyes were watching me, waiting for the right moment to make their move. But even with all the uncertainty and fear, something inside me started to shift. I wasn't going to let them control my life. I wasn't going to be a passive victim in this. I had spent too much time feeling powerless. Now, I was going to fight back. It wasn't easy, it wasn't even comfortable, but I wasn't backing down. The investigation continued, and each new piece of information uncovered made the situation even more complex. Mark and I worked together, gathering clues and talking to contacts. The deeper we went, the more dangerous it seemed. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself why I was doing this: for my own peace, for my own future. And no one was going to take that from me. I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. It echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I wasn't just a passive participant in my own life. Whoever had called me knew things about me, my movements, my routines, and worse yet, they had no intention of letting me live in peace. I knew deep down that I couldn't just wait for things to happen. I couldn't sit back and let whatever game they were playing unfold around me. I had to take control, not just for myself, but for the safety of everyone I cared about. I called Mark first thing the next morning, my heart heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "Mark, I need answers," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "Whoever's behind this, they're watching me. I can't sit here and wait for them to make their next move." "I know, Sarah," Mark replied. "I'm getting closer. I've been looking into the truck's final destination, and I believe it's linked to a series of underground operations. But this isn't just about tracking you anymore. You're in deeper than you think." I listened intently, my heart racing. "What do you mean? What does this have to do with me?" Mark paused for a moment, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "I've traced the device. The truck you followed, it's not just carrying goods, it's part of a larger network. And you're involved." I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. "Involved in what?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "I'm still piecing it together, but I believe your involvement is tied to your company. Something you're working on or something that's connected to it. I'll need more time, but we need to act fast. Whoever's behind this is serious. And they don't stop until they get what they want." I felt a wave of panic rush over me. My company? What could it have to do with this? I had always thought of myself as small, insignificant even, just starting out in the business world. But if my work had caught the attention of something so dangerous, that meant I had far more at stake than I'd ever imagined. I didn't have time to question the details. All I knew was that I was no longer the victim of random events. I was in the middle of something much bigger. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mark," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that still gripped my chest. "But I need to know more. I need to be prepared." For the next few days, I immersed myself in research, trying to learn everything I could about the underground operations Mark had mentioned. I spent hours at my desk, reading articles, following leads, and connecting dots. It wasn't easy. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how little I actually knew. I wasn't just being watched. I was entangled in something much darker, something I hadn't asked for. But I couldn't turn back now. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous things seemed to become. My gut told me that whoever had planted that tracker on my car was watching me closely. They knew everything, where I went, who I talked to, where I worked. I had to find a way to break free from their control. The phone rang late one night while I was working. It was Mark. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice urgent. "I've found something. It's linked to your company, and it's more dangerous than I thought." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What is it, Mark?" "I've traced the connections," he said. "Your company has unwittingly gotten caught up in a money laundering scheme. The operations I've been investigating, they're all connected to your business, directly or indirectly. And your name, Sarah, it's already in their records." I blinked, trying to comprehend what he was saying. "Money laundering? How? I don't even know anything about that. My company is legitimate, it's just small business stuff. I didn't sign up for any of this." "I know you didn't," Mark replied, his voice filled with sympathy. "But the fact is, someone is using your company as a front for a much bigger operation. You're in the middle of something you never intended to be part of." I sat back in my chair, feeling dizzy. I had worked so hard to build my business. I had spent months fighting for every client, every opportunity, trying to make a name for myself. I never imagined that, somewhere in the shadows, my business was being used for something illegal. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered, more to myself than to Mark. "I know," Mark said, "but we can't let this go. You need to cut ties with anyone connected to these operations, and fast. We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control." The days that followed were a blur of panic and planning. I met with Mark several times, going over everything he had found. We made a plan to cut ties with anyone who might be involved in the money laundering scheme. I started reviewing all my business connections, checking for anything that didn't feel right. The process was exhausting, but it was necessary. I had to protect myself, my business, and the people I cared about. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I left the house, I felt eyes on me, following me. I couldn't escape the sense that whoever was behind this was always one step ahead, always ready to make their next move. It was terrifying, but I refused to let fear control me. I had come too far to back down now. One evening, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Jake, my son. He had come home from school and noticed that I had been distant lately. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, sitting down next to me at the kitchen table. "You've been acting different. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to mask my worry. Jake had always been perceptive, and I hated lying to him, but I didn't want to burden him with the truth, not yet. "I'm fine, Jake," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little stressed with work, that's all." He didn't buy it, of course. "I can tell something's up," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You can talk to me, you know." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. There's been some stuff going on with the business, some complications." He looked at me with concern. "What kind of complications?" I hesitated. It wasn't easy for me to open up, especially when it came to something so complicated. But Jake had always been my rock. "There are some people involved in things they shouldn't be," I finally said, "and I'm trying to figure it all out." Jake didn't say anything for a moment, then he nodded. "I trust you, Mom. I know you'll handle it, you're strong." His words made my heart swell. I wanted to believe that I was strong, that I could handle everything on my own. But the truth was, I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen next, and it was hard to admit that to my son. but I wasn't going to let fear win. "I'm going to fix this," I said, more to myself than to Jake. "I'll take care of it, and I won't let anything happen to us." The investigation continued, and with every new discovery, the situation grew more dangerous. Mark and I began taking extra precautions, making sure we weren't being followed, securing our communication channels, and keeping an eye on everyone we interacted with. The fear was constant, but so was the determination. I knew that I couldn't stop now. Whoever was behind this might think they had the upper hand, but I wasn't going to let them win. I had fought too hard to get to this point, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. One day, after a particularly long meeting with Mark, I walked outside to clear my head. As I stood on the street, looking out at the bustling city, I realized something important. I was no longer afraid. I had come so far, and though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I was in control of my fate. No one else was going to dictate my life. Not anymore. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Every time I looked at my phone, I was afraid of the next call, the next message, or the next piece of information that would turn my world upside down. But what was worse than the fear itself was the uncertainty. I still didn't know who was behind the tracker or why they had involved me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just a bystander in this situation. I was part of something much bigger. Every time I turned a corner, I felt like I was being watched. I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following me, or worse, to confront me. But as the days passed, I knew I couldn't live in fear. I had to face whatever was coming my way. I kept pushing forward, even when my anxiety threatened to overtake me. I stayed in touch with Mark, who continued to dig deeper into the connections behind the tracker. But every answer he uncovered only seemed to lead to more questions. It was like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer revealed something more complex, more dangerous. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my emails when my phone rang. It was a private number. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up. "Hello." "Sarah," the voice on the other end said, smooth and cold. "I know you're looking for answers, and I'm going to give you one, but you need to listen carefully." I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was unfamiliar, but it had an eerie sense of familiarity to it, as though it was someone who had been watching me for a long time. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaky but firm. "You don't need to know my name," the voice replied. "But you do need to know that you're in too deep. The people you're dealing with are dangerous, and if you keep digging, you're going to regret it." The fear that had been bubbling inside me finally surfaced. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay out of it and you'll be fine," the voice said, almost too calmly. "But if you don't, we'll make sure you regret it." I felt the blood drain from my face. The voice was threatening me, and there was something chilling about the calmness in it, as if they were toying with me. I opened my mouth to respond, but the line went dead. My hand shook as I lowered the phone, the weight of the conversation settling over me like a blanket of dread. They knew I was involved, and they weren't going to let me back out now. I didn't know who these people were, but I was sure of one thing: they were willing to do whatever it took to keep their secrets hidden. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the wall, but instead, I sat there in silence. What was I supposed to do now? The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of determination. I was done being afraid. I had spent too much time running from the truth, from the fear of what I might uncover. No more. I had to finish this, to find the answers, no matter how dangerous it might be. I dressed quickly, determined to face whatever came my way. I had already contacted Mark and asked him to meet with me that afternoon. I needed to know what he had uncovered. I needed to know if I was walking into a trap or if there was a way out. At the meeting, Mark looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with an air of urgency, and as soon as I sat down, he spoke. "I've found something," Mark said, his voice low. "But it's not good. It's worse than we thought." I frowned, my heart pounding. "What do you mean? What did you find?" Mark leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "Your business, it's connected to a group of powerful people. These aren't just criminals. They have connections, money, influence. And it looks like they've been using your company as a front for their operations." I stared at him, trying to process his words. What kind of operations? What are they doing? I don't have all the details yet, Mark said, but I've tracked some of their activities, and it's not just about illegal transactions. They're using your company for something much bigger, and you're involved whether you realize it or not. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. I had spent years building this company, working hard to create something legitimate. I'd poured my heart and soul into it, and now I was hearing that my work had been hijacked by dangerous people. People who had used me, used my name, and now I was caught in the middle of it all. How did this happen? I asked, my voice tight. How did they get involved with my company? Mark shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. I don't know yet, but I'm getting closer. What I do know is that they've been watching you for a long time. They know your every move, Sarah. They're monitoring your life. I felt a chill run down my spine. How do I get out of this? I whispered. Mark met my eyes, his expression serious. You don't, not unless you confront them. You're in too deep, and if you try to back out now, they'll make sure you regret it. The fear crept in again, but this time I pushed it down. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. I wasn't going to be a victim. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could, reviewing my company's accounts, meetings, and contacts. I needed to understand how they had infiltrated my business, and I needed to know exactly who was behind it. Every lead I followed seemed to take me down a darker path. The more I discovered, the more I realized how far-reaching their influence was. I wasn't just dealing with some petty criminals. I was up against a network of people who could ruin my life without a second thought. A week later, I received another call. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't threatening. It was calm, collected. Sarah, the voice said, we know you've been looking into us, and we know you're trying to find a way out. I froze. What do you want? We want you to stop. Leave it alone, and everything will go back to normal. But if you keep pushing, we won't hesitate to take action. I clenched my fists, my heart racing. You don't scare me, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. We'll see, the voice said before hanging up. I dropped my phone onto the table, a wave of anger washing over me. No one was going to intimidate me. I had come too far to back down now. I had fought for my company, fought for my independence, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me. I called Mark again the next day, my mind made up. I need to meet with them, I said. I'm not going to wait around for them to come after me. I'm going to face this head on. Mark hesitated. Are you sure? This could get dangerous, Sarah. I'm done running, I said firmly. I need to take control of this, and I can't do that by hiding. Mark sighed, but he understood. All right, I'll help you. We'll do this on your terms. The day of the confrontation came faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with a mixture of nerves and determination. I wasn't sure what I was about to face, but I knew I had to be ready. I put on my best outfit, professional, yet intimidating. I needed them to see me as a force to be reckoned with, not someone to be bullied or ignored. As I walked into the meeting, I was met with the cold, calculating stares of the people behind this operation. They were not like me. They didn't care about anything except power and control. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I'm here to make a deal, I said, my voice steady but fierce. I want out. I want you to leave my company and never contact me again. And if you don't, I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you've been doing. There was silence in the room. They looked at each other, as if deciding whether or not they should take me seriously. But I wasn't afraid. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them take everything I had worked for. Finally, one of them spoke. You think you can just walk away from this? You're already in too deep. You don't get to make demands. I'm making demands, I said, my voice unwavering. You either leave me and my business alone, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. The moment I walked out of that meeting, I felt like I had stepped into a whole new world. The calm I had been trying to hold onto was slipping through my fingers, replaced by a mix of fear and adrenaline. This was bigger than me now. It wasn't just about my business or the tracker, it was about something far more dangerous. But I wasn't backing down. I refused to. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this alive, this full of purpose. Every step I took away from that room felt like a giant leap into the unknown. I knew there was no turning back. What I had started was now a path I couldn't unwalk. The truth was, I had always known there was something off about my life. The way things had unfolded after my divorce, the way people in my family had treated me, the secrets that I knew were buried deep. It all added up to something darker. But it wasn't until the tracker that I realized just how deep it all went. I had been living in the shadows, and now I was stepping into the light, ready to face everything head-on. I didn't know who they were, these people controlling everything from the shadows. But one thing was clear, they weren't going to just walk away. And neither was I had too much at stake. Mark was waiting for me in his office. The look on his face told me that whatever had just happened in that meeting was more serious than I had realized. "You okay?" he asked as soon as I sat down. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just ready to finish this." "You're sure you want to keep going?" Mark's voice was low, hesitant. "This could get a lot more dangerous. You've already gotten yourself into a situation you didn't ask for." "I didn't ask for it, but I'm in it now," I said, my voice firm. "And I'm not running anymore. I've spent too long hiding, too long letting people walk all over me. This is my life, and I'll fight for it." Mark studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing as if weighing my words. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I respect that. You've got guts, Sarah, but you need to understand this isn't going to be easy. These people have resources, power. They've been playing this game for a long time." "I know," I said, "but I'm done being afraid." Mark's expression softened. "All right, but if we're going to do this, we need to act quickly. I've been looking into their operations, but they're careful. They cover their tracks well. We'll need a strategy." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "I'm ready. What's next?" The next few days were a blur of activity. Mark and I, along with a few trusted allies he had brought in, began to piece together a plan. We couldn't just go in blind. We needed to gather information, expose their weaknesses, and use whatever resources we had to our advantage. But the more we dug, the more I realized how far this went. It wasn't just about the money laundering operation anymore. These people controlled everything. They had infiltrated businesses, manipulated people in positions of power, and controlled the flow of information. They were untouchable. But they weren't untouchable to me. I spent hours, days even, researching, connecting the dots. Mark and his team worked tirelessly, tracking down leads, gathering intel. It was like we were moving in the dark, but with each new piece of information, the light grew brighter. One night, after hours of work, Mark called me. "I found something," he said, his voice urgent. "Something big." "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing. "Remember the truck? The one you saw heading to Canada? It's linked to a high-profile operation. I've traced some financial transactions, and they're not just laundering money. They're planning something even bigger, something international." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean, something bigger?" "They're moving large sums of money across borders, but they're also manipulating entire industries. The company you've been working with, they're involved in this, and it's not just a few bad eggs. This goes straight to the top." I stood up, my hands trembling. "What do we do now?" Mark was silent for a moment. "We take them down." The next few days were a blur of preparation and tension. We worked quickly, gathering the final pieces of information, making plans for how we would confront the people behind it all. But with every step we took, I could feel the danger closing in. This wasn't a game anymore. This was life or death. But there was no turning back. I couldn't back down now. I had too much to lose, too many people depending on me, and honestly, I was tired of being afraid. It was time to fight. On the day of the final confrontation, I could barely breathe. My palms were slick with sweat as I adjusted my outfit, trying to appear calm and collected. I had no idea what we were walking into. Mark had arranged for us to meet with some of the higher-ups in this operation. It was risky, but it was the only chance we had. When I arrived at the meeting place, my heart was in my throat. I was ready to face whatever came my way, but the fear still lingered. I had worked so hard to get here, and now it all came down to this moment. Mark met me outside, his expression as tense as mine. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I have no choice," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's do this." We entered the building together, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. But there was no other choice. This was the moment where I would either rise or fall. The meeting went exactly as I had feared. The people we were dealing with were dangerous, calculating, and more powerful than I could have imagined. But instead of backing down, I held my ground. "Enough games," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "I know what you're doing, and I won't let you keep destroying people's lives." They laughed dismissively, as if my words meant nothing to them. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to give up now. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You can threaten me, you can manipulate me, but you will not control me anymore. I'm taking my life back." And then everything changed. The confrontation turned into a full-blown battle. The people behind this operation didn't take kindly to being exposed, but they underestimated me. They thought I was just some small business owner, someone they could push around. But I wasn't that anymore. I had learned how to fight, how to stand up for myself, how to take control of my fate. As the confrontation unfolded, Mark and I made sure to gather all the evidence we needed. We filmed everything. We documented every word, every movement, knowing that once we exposed them, there was no going back for them. We had them cornered. In the end, they were forced to back down. The power they had once held over me, over my life, was gone. They couldn't control me anymore. The aftermath of the confrontation was intense, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. I had fought for my business, for my future, and most importantly, for myself. As I stood there, looking out at the horizon, I realized something important. The fear that had once held me back was gone. I had faced my demons, and I had won. I had built something real, something that no one could take from me. I had proven to myself that I was stronger than I ever thought possible. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And no matter what came next, I knew I had the power to face it. The days following our confrontation felt like a strange dream. I had taken control of my life, exposed the people who had been hiding in the shadows, and yet, the weight of everything still hung over me. It wasn't just the relief of taking back my power. It was the realization that my world had shifted forever. The people who had once controlled me were no longer a threat, but the world ahead of me was still uncertain. I had made it through the hardest part, but now I had to learn to live with the consequences of my actions, and the knowledge that I could never go back to the person I once was. The air felt heavier now, as if the entire city had changed with me. The familiar streets, the quiet corners where I used to walk, it all felt different. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made me realize how much I had grown. I wasn't just Sarah anymore. I was the woman who had faced fear head-on and walked away stronger. And while I had made my peace with the past, I knew there was no going back. The first week after the confrontation was chaotic. The legalities, the paperwork, the fallout from exposing the operation, it all hit at once. But there was a strange sense of clarity in it all. I had been running on adrenaline for so long, but now that the dust was settling, I could breathe again. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer afraid. The fear that had once gripped me so tightly was finally starting to loosen. One evening, I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some documents when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me it was important. My fingers hovered over the screen before I swiped to answer. "Hello." "Sarah," the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was a calmness to it that put me at ease. "This is Detective Andrews. I've been following up on your case." I sat up straighter in my chair, feeling a pang of anxiety in my chest. "What case?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The operation you uncovered. We've been digging into their network, and we've found some disturbing information. I think you should know that what you're involved in is much bigger than you thought." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "We've been investigating this group for months. They've been laundering money for some of the most powerful people in the world. Your involvement wasn't random. They targeted you because they thought you were easy to manipulate." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I had no idea. I just wanted to run my business. I didn't sign up for any of this. "I know," Detective Andrews said, his voice softer now. "But we have a lead on the people behind it, and we need your help to bring them down." I was silent for a moment. The thought of getting deeper into this world, of risking even more, terrified me. But then I thought of everything I had already done. I had faced my fears. I had taken control of my life, and if there was any way I could help stop this, I had to do it. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. "What do you need from me?" "We'll keep you updated," Detective Andrews said. "But for now, just stay safe. You've already done more than enough by exposing their operation. We'll handle the rest." The next few weeks were filled with uncertainty. Mark kept me updated on the investigation, but it felt like we were just waiting. Waiting for someone to make the next move, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. I kept working on my business, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But every time I left my house, I felt that familiar sense of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, waiting for me to slip up. But I didn't slip up. I couldn't afford to. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a meeting with a potential client when I received a text from Mark. It was brief, but the message sent a chill down my spine. "We've got a lead. It's time, be ready." I tried to remain calm, finishing the meeting as best as I could, but my mind was elsewhere. What did Mark mean by "it's time"? What was happening? As soon as the meeting ended, I rushed out of the office and called him. He answered on the first ring. "Mark, what's going on? What did you mean by that message?" "Meet me tonight," he said. "I'll explain everything." That night, I met Mark at a cafe on the edge of town. It was a quiet place, away from prying eyes. He was waiting for me at a corner table, his face tense and serious. "Sit down," he said, not bothering with small talk. "This is bigger than we thought." "What do you mean?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. "I've been following up on the leads, and we've uncovered something shocking," Mark said, lowering his voice. "There's a high-ranking individual behind this operation, someone with power, and we've traced their location." I felt my stomach tighten. "Who is it?" Mark's face grew darker. "I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're not going to back down without a fight." "What do we do now?" I asked, my hands shaking. "We go after them," Mark said firmly. "But we need to be careful. This person has influence, and they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. We need to stay one step ahead." Over the next few days, I did everything I could to prepare for what was coming. Mark and I worked together, gathering information, making plans, and staying as low-key as possible. The weight of the situation hung over me constantly, but I couldn't let it stop me. I had come too far. I wasn't going to let them win now. Every day felt like we were inching closer to the truth, but the closer we got, the more dangerous everything seemed. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I received a call from Mark, his voice strained with urgency. "Sarah, you need to leave, now." "Why?" I asked, my heart racing. "They know we're getting close. We've been compromised. Someone tipped them off." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, who?" "I don't know yet, but I think they're coming for you." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things, shoved my laptop and documents into my bag, and rushed out the door. I didn't know who was after me or what they wanted, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I didn't look back as I drove. I just went. I went to the one place I knew I'd be safe, my parents' house. When I arrived at my parents' house, I felt a strange sense of relief. The familiar smell of my mother's cooking, the quiet hum of my father's voice on the phone, it all reminded me of a time when life was simpler, when things weren't so complicated. But even as I walked through the door, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted, and I wasn't about to let them take everything I had worked for. That night, I barely slept. I kept looking out the window, my heart racing every time a car passed by. I wasn't sure who was watching me anymore, but I was done being afraid. I had fought too hard to let fear control me. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to fight for my life. The next morning, I received a text from Mark. It was short, but the words sent a wave of dread through me. "We know who's behind it. It's bigger than we thought. We need to move fast." I took a deep breath. I was ready. Whatever came next, I was going to face it head-on. As I prepared to leave my parents' house, I knew that I was no longer the same woman who had first found that tracker under her car. I had changed. I had become someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself, someone who wasn't going to let anyone take control of her life again. And I wasn't going to stop until I had uncovered the truth, no matter what it took. The days following our confrontation felt like a strange dream. I had taken control of my life, exposed the people who had been hiding in the shadows, and yet, the weight of everything still hung over me. It wasn't just the relief of taking back my power. It was the realization that my world had shifted forever. The people who had once controlled me were no longer a threat, but the world ahead of me was still uncertain. I had made it through the hardest part, but now I had to learn to live with the consequences of my actions, and the knowledge that I could never go back to the person I once was. The air felt heavier now, as if the entire city had changed with me. The familiar streets, the quiet corners where I used to walk, it all felt different. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made me realize how much I had grown. I wasn't just Sarah anymore. I was the woman who had faced fear head-on and walked away stronger. And while I had made my peace with the past, I knew there was no going back. The first week after the confrontation was chaotic. The legalities, the paperwork, the fallout from exposing the operation, it all hit at once. But there was a strange sense of clarity in it all. I had been running on adrenaline for so long, but now that the dust was settling, I could breathe again. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer afraid. The fear that had once gripped me so tightly was finally starting to loosen. One evening, I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some documents when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me it was important. My fingers hovered over the screen before I swiped to answer. "Hello?" "Sarah," the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was a calmness to it that put me at ease. "This is Detective Andrews. I've been following up on your case." I sat up straighter in my chair, feeling a pang of anxiety in my chest. "What case?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The operation you uncovered. We've been digging into their network, and we've found some disturbing information. I think you should know that what you're involved in is much bigger than you thought." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "We've been investigating this group for months. They've been laundering money for some of the most powerful people in the world. Your involvement wasn't random. They targeted you because they thought you were easy to manipulate." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I had no idea. I just wanted to run my business. I didn't sign up for any of this. "I know," Detective Andrews said, his voice softer now. "But we have a lead on the people behind it, and we need your help to bring them down." I was silent for a moment. The thought of getting deeper into this world, of risking even more, terrified me. But then I thought of everything I had already done. I had faced my fears. I had taken control of my life, and if there was any way I could help stop this, I had to do it. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. "What do you need from me?" "We'll keep you updated," Detective Andrews said. "But for now, just stay safe. You've already done more than enough by exposing their operation. We'll handle the rest." The next few weeks were filled with uncertainty. Mark kept me updated on the investigation, but it felt like we were just waiting. Waiting for someone to make the next move, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. I kept working on my business, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But every time I left my house, I felt that familiar sense of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, waiting for me to slip up. But I didn't slip up. I couldn't afford to. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a meeting with a potential client when I received a text from Mark. It was brief, but the message sent a chill down my spine. "We've got a lead. It's time, be ready." I tried to remain calm, finishing the meeting as best as I could, but my mind was elsewhere. What did Mark mean by "it's time"? What was happening? As soon as the meeting ended, I rushed out of the office and called him. He answered on the first ring. "Mark, what's going on? What did you mean by that message?" "Meet me tonight," he said. "I'll explain everything." That night, I met Mark at a cafe on the edge of town. It was a quiet place, away from prying eyes. He was waiting for me at a corner table, his face tense and serious. "Sit down," he said, not bothering with small talk. "This is bigger than we thought." "What do you mean?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. "I've been following up on the leads, and we've uncovered something shocking," Mark said, lowering his voice. "There's a high-ranking individual behind this operation, someone with power, and we've traced their location." I felt my stomach tighten. "Who is it?" Mark's face grew darker. "I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're not going to back down without a fight." "What do we do now?" I asked, my hands shaking. We go after them, Mark said firmly. But we need to be careful. This person has influence and they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. We need to stay one step ahead. Over the next few days, I did everything I could to prepare for what was coming. Mark and I worked together, gathering information, making plans, and staying as low-key as possible. The weight of the situation hung over me constantly, but I couldn't let it stop me. I had come too far. I wasn't going to let them win now. Every day felt like we were inching closer to the truth, but the closer we got, the more dangerous everything seemed. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I received a call from Mark, his voice strained with urgency. "Sarah, you need to leave, now." "Why?" I asked, my heart racing. "They know we're getting close. We've been compromised. Someone tipped them off." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, who?" "I don't know yet, but I think they're coming for you." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things, shoved my laptop and documents into my bag, and rushed out the door. I didn't know who was after me or what they wanted, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I didn't look back as I drove. I just went. I went to the one place I knew I'd be safe, my parents' house. When I arrived at my parents' house, I felt a strange sense of relief. The familiar smell of my mother's cooking, the quiet hum of my father's voice on the phone, it all reminded me of a time when life was simpler, when things weren't so complicated. But even as I walked through the door, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. And I wasn't about to let them take everything I had worked for. That night, I barely slept. I kept looking out the window, my heart racing every time a car passed by. I wasn't sure who was watching me anymore, but I was done being afraid. I had fought too hard to let fear control me. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to fight for my life. The next morning, I received a text from Mark. It was short, but the words sent a wave of dread through me. "We know who's behind it. It's bigger than we thought. We need to move fast." I took a deep breath. I was ready. Whatever came next, I was going to face it head-on. As I prepared to leave my parents' house, I knew that I was no longer the same woman who had first found that tracker under her car. I had changed. I had become someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself, someone who wasn't going to let anyone take control of her life again. And I wasn't going to stop until I had uncovered the truth. No matter what it took each morning after I left my parents' house, the weight of everything hit me harder than I expected. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing I had to leap into the unknown, but not quite sure what awaited me on the other side. The past few days had been filled with so much fear and uncertainty, and it felt like the storm was only just beginning. But no more running, no more hiding. It was time for me to face everything head-on. As I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, I replayed the events of the last few weeks in my mind. The tracker, the mysterious calls, the terrifying realization that I was deeper into something far bigger than I'd ever imagined. I had started this journey thinking I was just dealing with a small issue, a couple of hidden secrets. But now, it was a full-blown operation that reached into areas of power and influence I couldn't have dreamed of. And then there was the phone call from Mark, the one where he told me that we had finally uncovered who was behind it all. The person behind everything was someone I knew, someone from my past, someone I never would have suspected. It was a few hours later when Mark showed up at my parents' house. His face was tense, his eyes heavy with the burden of everything we had uncovered. As soon as he walked in, I could feel the gravity of the situation. "Sarah," he said, sitting across from me, "I have some things to share with you, and you might not like all of it." I raised my eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "What is it?" "I've been going through everything, every lead we've got. I've been digging deeper into the people behind the operation, and I found a name, someone powerful." My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "It's your brother, Jason." I stared at him, the words barely registering in my mind. "What? No, that's impossible. Jason has been involved in this." Mark nodded grimly. "It's the only explanation. He's been funneling money through your company, using it as a cover for something much bigger." The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. Jason, my own brother, the person who I had always thought of as someone I could trust, someone who had my back, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could he do something like this? How? I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. Mark's eyes softened with sympathy. It's complicated, Sarah. He's been involved in this for a while, and it looks like he used you to cover his tracks. The company, your business, it was just a means to an end for him. I shook my head in disbelief. No, this can't be right. Jason wouldn't do this. I'm sorry, Sarah, but the evidence is clear. My world shifted on its axis. How could I have been so blind? Jason had always been a part of my life, always seemed supportive. But this was betrayal at its deepest level. I couldn't fathom how someone I trusted so much could be so involved in something so dark. But there was no time for self-pity. If I wanted to stop this and protect what I had worked for, I had to keep moving forward. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through every file, every piece of evidence Mark had gathered. It was like uncovering a truth I wasn't ready to hear, a truth that shattered everything I had thought I knew about my life. Jason had manipulated me, used my business to hide his dirty work, and worse, he had involved me in something I could never escape from unless I fought back. But the more I learned, the more my anger began to rise. How dare he use me like this? He had taken my trust and thrown it in my face. He had no idea who he was messing with. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself. I didn't recognize the woman who stared back at me. She was strong, confident, and determined, but she was also angry, and I was done being a victim. I was done letting people use me. I had spent too much of my life questioning my worth, doubting myself. Not anymore. I won't let him get away with this, I said to myself, my voice firm and steady. I'm going to take back control. The next morning, I drove to Jason's apartment. I had been avoiding him, keeping my distance for so long. Hopping the distance would keep me from having to face the truth. But now, I had no choice. When I knocked on the door, Jason opened it almost immediately. His face softened when he saw me, but I could tell there was something off about the way he looked at me. Hey, Sarah, he said, stepping back to let me in. What's going on? You okay? I didn't answer him right away. I just stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I had to confront him. I had to find out if he was really involved in all of this. Sit down, Jason, I said, my voice tight. We need to talk. He looked at me confused. About what? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. About everything. About the tracker. About the money laundering. About what you've been doing. Jason's face paled, and for a moment I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. What are you talking about, Sarah? I have no idea what you're. Don't lie to me, I shouted, stepping forward. I know what you've been doing. I know everything. He went silent, his eyes avoiding mine. I could feel the tension in the room grow heavier by the second. Jason, how could you? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and anger. How could you do this to me, to our family? I didn't mean for it to go this far, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I never wanted you to get involved. I thought I could clean it up before you found out. Clean it up, I repeated, my voice rising. You used me, Jason. You used my business, my name, to hide your lies, and now everything is falling apart. He looked down, ashamed. I never wanted to hurt you, but I needed the money. I was in over my head. I trusted you, I said, the weight of betrayal sinking in. I trusted you with everything, and you betrayed me. You put my life at risk. For the first time, I saw the true regret in his eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. You have two choices, I said, my voice cold. You can leave, or I'll expose everything. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for. Jason stood there, his face pale and regretful. After a long pause, he nodded. I'll leave, but please, Sarah, don't tell anyone. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I was done being silent. I had worked too hard to let someone like him tear down everything I'd built. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. It was hard to look at Jason the same way. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to fully forgive him for what he had done, but I couldn't let that define me. I had worked too hard to rebuild my life, and I wasn't going to let his actions ruin everything. I went to work, focusing on my business. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like a battle, but it was a battle I was ready to face. I kept telling myself that I had control now. I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me, not again. The story doesn't end here. As I moved forward, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the confrontation with Jason or even the betrayal itself. It was realizing that I had the power to change my own fate. I had always been the one to rely on others, to seek approval, to wonder if I was good enough. But no more. I was enough. I had always been enough. And the future? It was mine to create. Humanity was still standing, and they were stronger than ever.